I think we'll be starting now. Yeah, so let me start by first introducing myself and then I'll hand it over to Anurag for the presentation. Okay, so some of you are regular attendees and some of you are new. So thank you to the people who are new, and a big thank you to the people who attend this regularly. And yeah, so I am Karan Kapoor. I'm a freelance UI and UX designer. I'm based in New Delhi and I've been conducting these sessions for the past 3 months. Okay, so I conducted Figma sessions before, but then I got a lot of feedback that people wanted UX design and processes, UX research, and things of like such sort. Okay, so I started doing this, and this is the second session, and this is a UX research session. And the first one that we did was with Nishant. It was a UX design session, and yeah, so today I have invited over Anurag. He's an NID alumni, and he works at OLX. He's a UX researcher at OLX for the global market team. And yeah, so he'll be sharing some of the insights that he has learned over his career, and everything. He'll try to address your questions as well. We'll keep the presentation short, and we'll try to address your question in the Q&A. So leave your question in the chat. I'll be dropping them. I'll be addressing them during the Q&A. And if you want to address any question immediately, you can also unmute yourself and ask some questions. Okay. I think some of you are not on mute. Can you please unmute yourself? Yeah. Thank you. So yeah, Anurag, over to you. Let's start the presentation now.
Sure. I hope my screen is visible to everyone.
Yeah, now it is visible.
Yes, it's visible.
Okay, great. So guys, before I actually start, I would like to start with a real life story. And so here it goes. How many of you actually know this company or know this logo and what this company does? Come on, anyone. It's not putting anyone in the spot, but how many of you actually recognize this? Any?
Yeah, some of them know. There's a mixed reaction.
So this is Time Inc. or Time Magazine, as many of you would know. Any idea about what is actually happening or has happened with Time Magazine as of now?
No.
Okay. So what happened is Time Magazine has been acquired recently by its competitor, that is Meredith. Now, but the major question to ask here is, how did a 95-year-old company fail to keep up? And what went so wrong that, ye din bhi dekhna pad gaya unko? Well, amongst other major factors, they missed out on a very, very important factor, which was user research. Now, what exactly did they miss out and which proved so costly for them was actually the fact that they could not listen to the users. So now, what aspect of listening to the users did they actually miss out? The users needed different kind of content or different updated content rather, but were being but were being served the same old kind of content. While many of the users actually moved on to a digital platform, they were still being presented content in a very physical platform, in a print media. And eventually entropy set in, and the rest is history. So hey guys, I'm Anurag, and I work with OLX Group, and I'm part of the global product team. And currently, I'm working for emerging markets. and I really hope that you guys are doing some awesome and crazy stuff out there. So what actually is user research? So Interaction Design Foundation defines user research as the methodic study of target users, including their needs and pain points. So designers have the sharpest possible insights to work with to make the best designs. Some other sources, they kind of define user research or user experience research as the systematic investigation of your users in order to gather insights that will inform the design process. Now, while in no way am I negating any of these descriptions, but for me personally, user research is being one with your user to the extent that you feel the joy, the pain, the emotions, and the frustrations as your users do. And this is what forms the core of empathy, what all designers keep talking about. And this is actually the core of empathy, which also informs the design process that all of us we keep talking about, right? And also, this is exactly what differentiates a user researcher from a good user researcher. But then you can say, right, it's easier said than done, especially in today's times when everyone is talking about individualization, personalization, and everyone is so much attached to the sense of I. How do we actually get that empathy, or how do we actually get into that zone where we empathize with our users? Now, saying that there are tools and techniques which would actually teach you empathy would be a blatant lie. I'm outrightly talking about that it could be a blatant lie if anyone tells you that, okay, these are tools and these are techniques which will actually teach you empathy, right? But yes, there are certain methods which will definitely help you get a step closer to the realization of that empathy we are talking about. And there are certain processes and certain methods that are there existing. And today we are going to talk about the process as to how it actually happens in the industry. And then we will be talking about methods. So let's see how the process actually works in the industry. So to begin with, we have, we actually jolt our brains. And when we say we, I actually mean brainstorming sessions with product managers and designers. We jolt our brains. We have a lot of brainstorming sessions. And guys, I would just want to take a small pause here and say that if you have any kind of questions, right, please feel free to put it out in the chat there. Though the chat window is not visible to me as of now, but it would form a, sort of question bank for me towards the end of the session. So yeah, so moving on. To begin with, we actually jolt our brains, in which we have a brainstorming session with product managers and designers, in which we get together, we decide upon the intent of the project, and what is the scope, what is the context, what is the direction of the project, and then we decide upon what we actually have to answer certain questions regarding the project, and what is actually needed to be found out for for a particular project. To give you an example, say for just a small example, if you would have seen the OLX app. So this mobile only registration was a project that we were working on recently, and to inform the kind of decisions that we take at that point of time, right? So what we knew was certain figures which says that these many people actually use, say, Facebook as a login method, or say phone only as a login method, or Google or Gmail only as a login method, right? Now what we actually had to find out was what are the kind of issues that users were actually facing, or what are the kind of issues users were actually facing to log in or sign up using one particular method. So those were something maybe we did not have the question to, and that actually forms your the key research areas. So then the next phase, which we call it the think it through phase, or the strategizing phase of it, in which we actually freeze the research areas and define hypothesis that needs answering. Now, what are research areas? As I was talking about previously also, research areas are nothing but particular areas of interest which would get us closer to the user's thought process, their emotional state, and their mental model. Similarly, hypothesis is nothing but an assumption which is just based on limited evidence, right? So once that particular area of interest or the hypothesis has been frozen, and that actually basically defines your context or the boundary conditions for the research, that anything out of this is outside the scope of this research, we actually decide upon the methods which would best answer the above mentioned points. So now I will come to the methods at a later point of time, but as of now, deciding upon methods which would best answer the above point. So going back to the previous example in which we were talking about just say mobile only sign up, or say Facebook or Gmail, right? Which would be the best method to select this particular which would be the best method to select for this particular project? It could be, it could be just telephonic interviews, or it could be say surveys for that matter. Anything which would give an information at a very at a very boundary kind of a level. So that would give you a kind of a dipstick that these these are the kind of inputs that we are getting from the users. Now if you want to get into an in-depth kind of thing, then there are other methods which we'll be talking about at a later point of time. Now moving to the third point, even before the actual interview happens, right, or the actual research process happens, you have to actually script the whole process beforehand and prepare a format for note taking. Now, why is that particular thing done? It's the script that we're talking about it's like that of a script writer of a movie. So they kind of visualize how the whole process would be going, and they write a script, right? It is kind of similar to that, and it's called a discussion guide in the whole research process. So that is particularly done to avoid any kind of to avoid any kind of deviation from the intent of the research, or to keep the research bang on and focused, and any kind of deviation whatsoever is negated because of this particular discussion guide. And the note-taking format is also in tandem with that. So basically, if you're talking that, if you're saying that the intent of this research is, say, noticeability of the CTAs, or say noticeability of or clickability of particular CTAs, right? So that also, the note format is also taken, or the note format is also prepared in a way which is similar to that. So as and when the interview is going, it should be seamless for the particular observer who is actually taking the notes to kind of download the information from whatever is going on in the interview process into the note-taking format. So after the think it through phase, we have our live the moment phase. So live the moment is nothing but the execution phase, in which we conduct pilot tests, and in which we actually tweak anything based on the pilot test. Now, why these two are very important is that even though, if you would remember in the previous slide, we have spoken about scripting the whole process, right? We have spoken about scripting the whole process, as you can see here. There are certain times, or there are at times what would happen is you would observe that there are certain things which happens with the user which is outside the script, right? And those are the kind of things that actually gets captured in the pilot interview or the pilot test phase. And depending on the inputs from the pilot test phase, you can actually tweak anything, or you can actually tweak your questions in such a way that okay, since now I'm not getting to that point where I would want to be, so this is how I tweak my question so I can be there. So then comes the conducting the actual research phase, in which we again it's basically executing whatever method we have selected, and depending on the script, and taking notes real time. Again, that is something which an observer would be doing. So usually in an interview, we have got someone who's moderating, called the moderator, and then we have an observer who's observing and side by side taking notes too, right? And then the whole research process is actually captured in audio and video format, so that it could be analyzed at a later point of time if required, right? And obviously, to talk about research ethics, this particular phase of audio and video capture requires the consent of the user. I think someone's mic is not on mute. I would just request you to please put your mic on mute, guys. There's a lot of dog barking going on in the background. Thank you so much. Okay, great. So moving on. So basically, why it's called, or I have rather named it, "Live the Moment," is because you need to be immensely in the moment at that very point of time, because there is a high possibility of you getting, or missing a lot of, say, insights, observations, if you're not in the moment at that very point. So focus is very, very important there. I think someone's mic is, right? Someone's mic is, yep. Thank you.
Yeah, I think someone was on unmute.
Yeah.
So we have some questions in the chat. So would you like to answer them now, or would you like to answer them towards the end?
Okay. So here is one question: how should we conduct a quick research in case of freelance project where the client gives a requirement of 2 pages and have a discussion with you over video call? So what kind of questions can we ask, or what method should we use to extract the most out of the client? So I think what we can do is we can address the questions separately, because we have kept, I think, considerable amount of time for the Q&A session, right? So we could maybe go, else
I'm noting these questions, so we can address them later. So we have noted all your questions. We'll address them in a short while.
Okay, great. Fine. So, moving on. I was there at the live the moment. So what I was saying is, why I have rather named it "Live the Moment" is because this is the particular phase where you need immense focus, and a lot of living in the moment is happening here, actually, because if your attention is deviated, if you think about something else in that phase, right, your concentration levels have to be very high. Else what will happen is any kind of observations, or what the user is doing, or any kind of facial expressions the user is making, right, it will just, you may just miss it at that point of time. So hence, live the moment. So after live the moment actually comes the realization phase, or the phase where we talk about the insights part. I think and Pallavi had raised this question earlier also, so I will try to address it here. So in the realization phase, where we actually try to gather the insights, right, we relook at the video, we relook at the or we rehear the audio if required, and add to the existing notes again if required, right? Because else, if you have to keep in mind that there are timelines to be met, and any kind of work which is not required would be double the effort, and you may miss your or there is a chance of you missing your timelines. So once relooking the audio or the video recording or the video part is done, and you have actually gathered notes from those particular sources, so the notes which is there in the note taking format, you have to actually as a part of the next step, you actually have to code it. So now, what is coding? I will just give you a short example for that. So see this example here, in which we talk about. So say, for example, Q is a question from the interviewer to the user. So
Anurag, you're not audible.
Just 1 second, guys. Just 1 second. I think there is some issue with my internet. Am I audible?
Yes, Aruna, you're audible.
Okay. Guys, please let me know if my voice is not audible, because I think there is some issue with my net connection, because it's been raining here this morning.
Yeah,
all
sure.
good, right? All good, right? Okay, great. So for example, if you have a question from the researcher, from the moderator, which says that, what do you think about this? So this could be anything, right? A product or a service or any kind of an interface, right? The answer from the user comes like, I like it. I like this. Actually, this looks much better than earlier. Then the follow-up question could be from the moderator could be, okay, what will you be doing next? So the answer from the answer from the user comes as such. Okay, do I go here, और क्या मुझे यहाँ जाना चाहिए या फिर मुझे ये क्लिक करना चाहिए? So basically, once you've so this is just an example of an excerpt I've taken from one of the interviews. So basically, what is the coding part of which I was talking about earlier, right? This is nothing but, see, so this looks much better than earlier. So once you go through all the notes, right, you would find such excerpts or such verbatums from the users directly, which means something. So coding it in such a manner, like so basically here, in red, if it's visible to you guys, the user is actually talking about the look, and they really liked it. Similarly, in the second phase, where it is in this in this greenish phase highlighted, the user is talking about the flow, and the flow, because of the way, though the user has not said it out explicitly, they are actually finding it very confusing here, and hence the flow found the flow confusing at the first go. So similarly, once you go through all the whole note and the note format which was predetermined, you would find that certain things like this, right? So look, flow, and certain emotions would also come out, certain thought processes also would come out, and you would see that there are certain patterns which are emerging. So these would eventually club together and would form your major themes for the emerging themes for the research. So post that, you actually from those particular themes, then you can actually draw insights from the coded notes, obviously, and those insights would actually help you in giving proper design directions, or in any kind of changes if required in the already existing design directions. So moving on. So now we have, once we have actually realized, we have actually come, have got the insights, we've actually delivered the insights, comes one of the most important phases, which is the measuring phase. Now, why is measuring very important? And again, please bear this in mind, that it is a very scientific process, right? But the whole thing, it's a very scientific process, and hence it needs to be replicable. It needs to be measured again, right? So what are your parameters that you would be measuring has to be predetermined even before the research work starts. And measuring the product performance from data analytics hence becomes very, very important for you to actually gain any kind of data insights once you have the product actually shipped out, developed, and out there with users, or even maybe before that, when you are having an A/B testing kind of thing. So what is an A/B testing? Maybe we'll talk about it at a later point of time in maybe the subsequent slides. So summarizing, we have spoken about jolting our brains, which is the brainstorming session, thinking it through, that is strategizing about the whole interview, about the whole research process. Living the moment is executing the actual research process. Then comes the realization phase, in which we actually realize the insights, which we draw insights, and which we the themes and all of that from the note-taking section of it. And then how do we actually measure those particular things, right? So living the moment or executing it is obviously, it depends on a lot of methods that we were talking about earlier. And so the methods that I've put together, it's not an exhaustive list, but it majorly covers most of the things that is being executed in the industry as of now. So you've got usability lab tests, you've got ethnographic field studies, in which we actually go meet the user in their natural environment. You've got participatory design, you've got focus group interviews. You've got eye tracking, which is again where the eyeball movement, etc. Usability benchmarking with competitors, moderated, unmoderated, remote studies now, and a lot of these studies are being held now because of the lockdown thing, right? So remotely, a lot of research work is also being done. Then there is concept testing. So concept testing is something which is very exploratory in nature. So say even before you have a particular prototype, right, you have a certain concept in your mind, and this may not just be pertinent to an application. It may also be a service that you want to launch, right? So that particular service, you say define it in terms of a storyboard, a concept drawing, and kind of a thing, and then you have those kind of discussions with the user about what their thought process is about these particular storyboards or any kind of story narratives that you have built around those particular concepts. So then you've got your diary studies, camera studies, in which the user actually writes day to day. Say if it's a particular physical product we're talking about, or a digital product for that matter, in which you actually note down day to day activities of how they are doing it, what is happening. So overall, what will happen is it will collate into a lot of. It's basically done in a diary, and hence it's called diary study. So that diary will basically give you a lot of information about what the user has been doing and how they have been using it day to day. Or camera studies also for that matter, because you can just ask the user to, while you are using this particular application or product, just switch on your camera while you're doing it. Then there is obviously customer feedback, desirability studies, card sorting, which you guys would have heard about a lot, in which you actually have a lot of, say for example, if I talk about say iconography, say or say new icons, which is required to go out for your app, right? So now how will you actually define, or how will you actually relate that? So you have got, say, maybe 4 or 5 sets of icons, and how will you actually say or define that the users are liking these set of icons for the application and versus these sort of icons for the application, right? So then you may have card sorting exercise, in which the users actually sort the cards on the basis of the icons to say particular adjectives. Maybe you've got, say, exciting, or you say energetic, or any kind of such adjectives you've got, and you ask the user to map those kind of way of doing it. There can be other way of other ways of doing it, the card sorting exercise, in which you ask the user to map certain elements to certain other elements in which through which you can get a mental model of the user. So then you've got clickstream analysis, which is nothing but how the the click portion of it goes. Then you've got A/B testing. So again, A/B testing is something which is done to basically to understand or to do a kind of a this versus this, which from the name itself. So A versus B. If you have slight moderations in say prototype A versus prototype B, and randomly, if you just select a target audience and release prototype A versus randomly selected for prototype B, and see which one is getting a better traction, and what is the kind of behavior that the users are exhibiting. So those are again one kind of studies. So then there is unmoderated UX studies, true intent studies, intercept surveys, and email surveys, which everyone must be aware of. Now, the major question which still looms, right, is when do we use which method? And to answer that, right, there are majorly 2 particular areas. One is what users actually think versus what they actually do. So basically, this is about what the attitude of the user is. So when we talk about the attitude, it's more about what they believe in, what are their thought processes, what are the kind of emotions that they have, and versus what they actually do is basically when they're actually using a particular product, what is the kind of behavior they are exhibiting, right? So that is what attitude versus behavior, or what users think versus what they actually do. So that is a kind of thing in which we use it as a framework for selecting any kind of such methods. And secondly, we have got qualitative versus quantitative. So quantitative is, as the name only suggests, right, anything which can be quantified, or anything which has a data-driven insight or a data-driven input from its from that is something which is the quantitative aspect of it. You may have email surveys, you may have in-app surveys, etc. Those are that falls under the purview of the quantitative aspect of things. And you have the qualitative aspect of things, in which maybe you have got the numbers, but you do not know why it's happening, right? What is the reason for this particular behavior. Users not maybe not exhibiting a certain type of desired behavior. So you may actually think that, okay, why is it not happening, right? So qualitative aspects are those. So now to give you a better overview of how this actually works, you can just take a moment's time, and I think Karan, you will be sharing it with the participants later on, right? So
they can take a screenshot, and I will be sharing the last part of the slide, the resources that you had.
So guys, you can actually take a screenshot if required now, or you can Karan would anyways be sharing this with you guys later on. So basically, if you would see, right, the whole thing has been mapped in such a way that we are talking about behavioral and attitude. We are talking about the behavioral and the attitudinal part of it. So basically, how the users actually do versus what users actually think. And then you've also got qualitative aspect of it, and then you've got the quantitative aspect of it. So then you've got your email surveys and all of intercept surveys and A/B testing, clickstream analysis, all which will actually give you data regarding a particular prototype, etc. Right? That comes under the purview of the quantitative part of things. And then again, as I was saying, right, qualitative is nothing but answering the why part of things. That, certain things are maybe not happening according to the desires. So to answer that, you've got your participatory design. You've got focus groups in which users actually talk about a certain topic in a group, and then you've got interviews in which you have one-to-one interviews in which it's basically the whole process which I was talking to you about earlier, right? You actually frame the questions, you actually define the intent, you go ahead and you ask questions. And then somewhere in between, right, between the attitudinal about what users think and what users do, you have got ethnographic field studies in which you go speak to the user in their actual natural environment, in context environment in which you see the user use a particular kind of a product or see in what kind of an environment they are. So you are able to empathize better with them, right? So maybe if, say for example, if you're talking about say cars, right? So if you're talking about, say, many of the households in Delhi, they do not have cars. The people might say, ये reason हो सकता है, वो reason हो सकता है, ये reason हो सकता है. But then you'll go to these places and realize that यार उनके पास parking की जगह ही नहीं है. They might just have a bike जहाँ पे उन्होंने कहीं पे ऐसे ही घुसेड़ के रख दिया वो bike. And that is one of the major reasons, even though they have maybe money, they do not buy a car. They prefer a bike because they do not have any parking space altogether. So ethnographic field studies actually give you a lot of insights regarding such kind of environmental thing. And then you have your usability lab studies in which actually you have a particular lab setup in which the user comes and there are certain eye tracking, and you have got a lot of devices also nowadays in which you fit to the user's devices, and you can see where they are seeing, what are the kind of emotions they have, and all of those kind of things, right? So but the tough part of being a researcher or user researcher is yet to come, because being a researcher, right, there are many things which you have to be very, very wary of, and you should be very aware of the fact of what is a fact, what is an opinion, what are the kind of prejudices that people have, you yourself as a researcher you have, what are the kind of biasness that a user has, you as a researcher you may also have. There are many effects for that matter. There is confirmation bias, is framing effect, to name a few actually. So all these things actually you have to be very, very aware of it, and you have to hone your own thinking process and to let go of these kind of biasness, prejudices, differentiation of facts and opinion, any kind of judgments you may have against, say, a user, right? For example, if you are going in an interview and you have just seen the user and said, oh, ye to aisa hi hoga, maybe, right? He's maybe dressed shabbily. And then you say that, oh, iske paas to paisa hi nahi hoga, say, gaadi kharidne ke liye, or, mobile kharidne ke liye, whatever, right? So that's one level of biasness which is already creeped in. But then if you let go of that biasness, you would realize that eventually, as the research process is progressing, right, you would actually realize that there are certain things, because there are certain excuse me, there are certain ways because of which a user actually behaves or interacts with the particular product or a service or an application, and hence it is very, very important to let go of all the things that has been mentioned here. So towards coming towards the end of the session, I would like to give a bit of gyan. So be open to everything, be curious, notice the fineness of the details, and question everything and connect the dots, because ultimately everything is research. And for you guys, just as a giveaway, you can actually make a note of these books, which are really, really good. Think Like a UX Researcher. It talks about a lot of the biasness and the kind of biasness and the effects and all that we're talking about, and what are the how a UX researcher should be thinking about. The mindset is about personal transformation, and the empathy part of it we were talking about, right? The mindset and the age of empathy. These actually talk about the empathy portion of it, and how can you actually increase your emotional quotient, your EQ, or your empathy part of it. So yeah, guys, thank you for the session, and we can actually go forward with the questions, I think.
Okay. Yeah, Anurag. I think it was great. The great presentation was great. I understood a lot of things myself. Yeah. So now we'll start. We'll be starting a Q&A. So I have some questions noted down.
Sure.
Firstly, I'll be starting off with them. All right. There's a disturbance, I think.
Guys,
Okay.
I will switch off my camera because there is a load shedding at my place, and I've connected to the mobile hotspot. So I just switched off my video for now. Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, sure. So I think the voice is coming back inside the speaker. Are you online from two devices?
No. I am online from just one device itself. I think there's some net issue actually.
Okay, yeah. So let me ask the first question. So first question was by Neha. So she has asked that in user research, how do we approach to right kind of user participants to get the inputs?
Okay. So Neha, right? So basically, what you're talking about is you have got sampling criteria in research. So guys, am I audible?
Yeah, you're audible.
Yeah. So you have research, right? And you actually define who would be your target audience, and again, defining those sample criteria, or defining the sample criteria, is very, very much dependent on your personas. So the user personas, which we as it is actually informed from those kind of user personas. Does that answer my question, Neha?
Anurag, your voice was breaking.
Oh, okay. Just hold on, guys. My electricity is back. I'll try connecting it to the Wi-Fi. Okay, it's not still working. And am I audible?
Yes.
Yes,
Yeah.
better.
Okay. So what I was saying is that the personas which we build as designers, right? We define personas. We define who are actual target categories, who our users are. So a lot of these personas are actually used in defining the sample criteria. So now there has to be a minimum number of sample criteria. So if you're talking about a strategic project which is very, very important for the organization, then you have a sample which can run into 10 to 15 members, or even more for that matter. But if it is something of a sort of a usability for an application, for just a feature, right? I think in that case, around 5 to 6 members are also fine in certain situations. So So those members or those users are again picked up from the personas that you would have already defined for your users.
Okay.
Yeah.
Hello.
Yes.
Hello. Yeah. Hi,
Uh,
Akshita. Yeah.
Hi, sorry to interrupt. Based on the same question, Anurag,
Yeah.
like how does it practically happen, like in OLX or any company for that matter? Like how do you recruit people for interviews?
Okay. See, adding to the previous point from Neha, you have once you have your sample defined, again that would be part of a separate research altogether, which would help in defining who your personas are, who your users are. Once you have got that defined, right, you actually have partnership with recruiting agencies, and or at least that is something which happens with OLX, and so you have got your say recruiting agencies in which you actually go to them and say that this is our criteria, in which in a very crisp manner, right? So there should not be any kind of a discrepancy saying that okay, there should not be any confusion. So it should be very, very crisp and very, very understandable of what the criteria is. It's very much similar to like in say an SQL query in which you give certain criterias in which you'll get certain results, right? Exactly similar to that, you will have certain criterias which you give to the recruitment agency, and then there will be some sort of a buffer time in which they do the recruitment for you, and then you proceed with the research work.
Okay, thanks, Anurag.
Yeah, Akshita. Yeah. Yeah.
So coming on to our next question. This is from Rajat. So he says that how can we convince our management team for user research, especially for B2B product?
Okay. Great question. Great question. In fact, that is a very important and pertinent question, right? Um, so there are multiple methods for that. So one of the first and foremost uh, ways of convincing your management is firstly talk about the organizations which actually implement such kind of methods and such kind of processes, and उनको दिखाओ कि यार ये implement करके इनको ये फायदा हुआ है, and these are the kind of ROIs they have got. This is the kind of business, or this is the kind of return on investment they've actually got because of these processes that have been implemented. So this is one of the method, right? Then there are, you can go about the formula way also, right? You say for example in say in acquisition cost, right? In acquisition cost, marketing budget versus the number of people acquired, right, is a very important thing. So I'm just giving an example. You could also speak on similar terms in in certain in such terms in which you show a formula, say for example, right, in which you say that, see, if you're talking about people acquired, how would we actually know whom we are acquiring, or who our target users are? So basically you are giving a very logical kind of an argument to your management, because see, for management and business leaders, right, it is all about the kind of business you're getting and the kind of revenues at the end of the day. Everything you do has to translate into in terms of revenue or in terms of growth. These are the only two major factors which ultimately has to impact the business. So a kind of business impact shown in this manner would definitely work.
I So does it answer your question, Rajat? If you are still in the session.
Yes, yes. Actually, so very.
Okay. Yeah. Great.
I hope
So
I
the
will
next,
answer your question, Rajat.
Hello.
yeah.
Yeah, Rajat, I hope I was able to answer your question.
Yes, 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 yes. I got the idea.
Okay, great.
Okay. So the next question is by Aswathi Subhash. So
Yeah.
the question is, can you please let us know the different stages involved in coming up with customer personas for your project?
Okay. So the different stages, right? Again, so is, for example, this is a part of a separate research altogether. I was saying, right? So so for a product like OLX, or for an organization uh, like OLX, right, in which you have pan India users. So in that kind of a thing, right? How do you actually define the user? So we have had a separate session, or a separate research session for that. And so basically, once you go through all of this particular research process, right, and again, following the same process, even before going into that particular process, right, you define, what is your actual intent. You define what are the kind of categories people deal in particularly for OLX, right? Define what are the kind of categories people are dealing in, what are the price ranges people are dealing in, what are the technologically how people are dealing in. So basically, all these criteria are nothing but cuts or filters which will help you sift or filter people for defining the criteria. I think it's a separate topic altogether, and it's pretty big in that manner. If this really answers the question, great. Or maybe I could send out a write up to everyone if required.
You can. I think we come up with personas when the users have been a lot of users have been researched, interviewed, and then we find common patterns among them. Then we create a persona. So that is my understanding of the persona.
Yeah, basically that. Yes.
Okay. Yeah, so that is a very brief answer, I think.
Yeah.
Okay. So moving on to our next question. So how this is by Ankita. So how can we scope a personal research project when doing it for a portfolio building, since there are no real stakeholders?
Okay. That's a really great question, actually. See, for any kind of a research project, right? Mm, Firstly, defining, as I was talking about, the intent, right? The intent and the context. These are something which are very, very important, because research is such a field. You can just keep on doing research, and you will just get blown away, because you'll just get lost saying that, yaar, kitna research karunga, basically, right? So it's very important for you to define your scope, and define what you want to firstly research, and then define success criteria for your research. See, after I have done this research, I would have, say for example, I would have uh, increased, say, the footfall by X%, say for example, right? So you have got a success measure for your research, or you can also have a performance indicator. It's called KPI, key performance indicator, uh, for your key research areas. So defining all of these is very, very important. And uh, if you're talking about looking at it from a very portfolio point of view, showing the whole process is very, 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 very important, because it should not be that you have gone from stage A to stage B, and then there is a sudden jump from E to F. It should be a continuous train of thought from A to B to C to D to E to F, and everything you put out there in the portfolio should have got a data backing, or if not a data backing, it should have an experimentative explanation, or at least that logical jump should be made from any kind of a research report. So that particular train of thought is very, very important if you're talking about from a portfolio point of view. The whole process, basically, right? How did you arrive at that particular, firstly the problem, and then the insights and the solution. Yeah.
Okay. I think the question was answered. So now next question that we took up briefly in the session is that how should we conduct the research in case of freelance project where the client gives
Users over a discussion.
Sorry, Karan, I missed the question.
Am I audible?
Yeah, you are audible now.
Okay. So did you hear the question?
No, I did not get the question, Karan.
Okay, I received a call, I think. So the question is that how do we conduct a quick research when in case of freelance projects, basically, where the
Okay.
client gives you the requirements over a video call and gives you 2 pages worth of requirements?
Okay. So see, again, research for any particular project, it's basically the same, right? Be it a multinational company, be it a startup, be it a freelance project, the process is the same. The only thing which changes is, maybe the research budget. So big corporations like say Microsoft and Google will have millions of dollars in just research budget, but that may not be the case for say a startup, because again, startups are mostly in a firefighting mode, and so hence research budgets may not be that. So having said that, for a freelance project, right, there are certain, see, I previously, if you've seen, I have shown you say around 20 odd methods. So if it is totally up to you, and it totally depends upon the context of the research which you want to take up, which will cost you the least and give you the most amount of information from that particular list. So if it actually works, you can actually do guerrilla interviews also. Now, what is guerrilla interviews is nothing but just going there on the field, just randomly sampling people and asking them about, what do they think. If it's a application you're talking about, if it's an app you're talking about, just randomly grabbing hold of people and seeing what kind of a thought process they have about a particular thing. But again, yes, it a lot of it also depends on the kind of timelines you have and the kind of budget you as a freelancer would or could shell out for this particular phase.
Okay. I think that answers the question. It was asked by Jitendra.
Okay. I hope the
Okay,
question
so
was answered. Jitendra.
I don't think he's there.
Okay.
Yeah, it was
Okay,
on.
yeah,
Thank
he's
you.
there, I think.
Okay.
Okay, so next question is by Ankur. He has asked that in service-based projects where lots of restrictions are there to reach and end user, and you are there to reach end user, and you get all info from the product person. So how can we reach the end users basically?
Okay, yeah. So that might be, you know, a lot of a lot of an issue for the researcher. And having said that, you may actually want to bend things around your way. Having said that, try to be on the field there for the user to see if whatever the user is going through, basically shadowing the user, right? That's what I'm talking about. But yeah, I understand your situation and it may not be possible. So in that case, you may have to rely on technology again, in which you say in a service in which you capture the say service touch points you've got, right? You may place a particular technological touch point, say a camera or any kind of a facial capturing mechanism, in which they capture the emotions or the kind of expressions that the user is exhibiting, or the kind of body language the user is exhibiting at that point of time, and that may give you a lot of cues if it is not possible for you to get onto the field. But it is highly advisable that you actually get down to the field and go there, shadow the user, and to the extent that if you're talking about a service in which if it is a retail store, for example, right, you may be a retail salesman for that person. You just become the salesman, see, move around, be one of them, and see if you can figure out what is actually happening with the users. So that would be the best way. But obviously, having said that, if there are constraints, then resorting to technology is always the best option. Yeah.
I actually have a follow-up question to that. Do you mind me asking?
Yeah, sure, Vasudha.
So, I just wanted to know, when you said shadowing the participants, so what if, like, in B2B, B2C, following a participant isn't that hard because you're just looking at their screens. And I mean, like, if it's a product based company which has apps, right?
Yeah.
But if you're doing a B2B company, say,
Yeah.
so in those cases, how do you observe the participant without them being conscious?
So see, Vasu, the whole trick is about being one of them. It's not just, it's not us and them. It's just we is the whole key to the thing here. And it's basically you have to think like, I'm not sure if you guys are a fan of Sherlock Holmes, but if you see how detectives work, right, they just blend in with the crowd, and they just want to be one with them. So obviously I'm talking about a very ideal situation in which you have to break down your own mental blocks, because having to do such a kind of thing in which you actually blend in with the crowd is something a normal person cannot do. And that is actually what I'm saying is the toughest part of being a research actually comes. So there is no one correct one particular method of doing research, but yes, these are the ways in which you can actually, or you should be doing it if you want to get as much close to the user as possible. There are certain cases in which people actually go and stay with the users also, for that matter, to understand that यार उनके घर में क्या दिक्कतें चल रही है, उनके घर में क्या खाना खाते हैं, क्या बर्तन यूज करते हैं, डे टू डे वो लोग कौन से टाइम पे क्या करते हैं. There are certain situations of as that also, right? So if you can get that much close to the user, then nothing like it.
Okay, thank you.
Hi, Anurag.
Hey, Ankur.
Hi, Anurag. I'm good. Actually, Anurag, just to clear my question once again, like, actually, when I'm talking about the service, it's kind of a banking. It's a kind of a banking domain. So there are lots of secrecy in our data, so which I think users don't want to share it to anybody. And even my end user is not able to talk about it to you, like how they use the interface to deal with the whole scenario. So in that cases, what would be the right way? Because observing maybe not the right solution, because if they are sitting in a bank, they don't want me to see their screen, right?
Yeah.
Observing is kind of a difficult situation for in that kind of a scenario. So then, what would be the best solution? Because of the secrecy of data, they don't want to get particular thing out of their like on their premises, and they don't want people to sit next to them and start observing them how they are doing. Maybe they don't share the whole thing also. Maybe they hide their own behavior and everything. So that is something challenging in that kind of an environment.
Okay.
So what would be the better solution?
So Ankur, I'm not sure if I've got your question right, but I will try to answer that nevertheless, whatever my understanding of the question is. So there are constraints in which you have to function, right? Hello?
Yes, Anurag, please carry on.
Yeah. So see, again, Ankur, right? These are the kind of things you will actually have to clear out with your client firstly, if the kind of data they can actually give you, because the whole research and design process is again like a chess game. So in a chess game, you may have n number of moves within the game, but there is something which there are certain rules which are set predefined, right? So that is what forms your constraint. Within that, you can actually play whatever you do. You can design whatever you want, but you have your constraints, and these are your set of rules that you have to set. So these are the kind of rules that you have to set with your client, saying that यार ये नहीं हुआ तो मैं तो नहीं कर पाऊंगा ये चीज, आप प्लीज ये मुझे इतना करके देना ही है आपको, एल्स बाद में अगर आउटपुट इज नॉट गुड, देन आप मुझे मेरे पास क्यों लगाना.
You're right. I agree with you. Because these something need to be like to discuss with the business also. How
Exactly.
you want to do that?
Exactly. Say for example, if you're talking about say making fried rice for that example, and आप fried rice की बात कर रहे हैं और उसमें rice ही नहीं है, then how are you actually going to make the fried rice, right? So you would need that particular ingredient. So similar in your case also, I'm assuming that it is something similar to that.
Yes. You are actually bingo on that.
Yeah.
Thank you, Anurag. Thank you.
Yeah. No.
Yeah, so Yeah, we'll be taking up questions. So I would request you, Anurag, that you answer very quickly. I think we are over the 1 hour mark already.
Sure.
So one question is from Akshita that how while recording the users in say user research or interviewing them, they tend to change their behavior. So how to avoid that situation where they don't change their behavior and we can observe them in their natural environment. So yeah, how to ease them up basically.
Okay. So see, there are two approaches, and I'll keep it very short. There are two approaches, or there are two ways to do it. First, you as a researcher, you become very comforting and easing towards the other person, so that even your research process or even the way you talk is again a very UX kind of a thing. Your user experience also kicks in here. How comfortable you make the user feel to open up. That is one part of it. The other part of it is how discreetly can you capture the information. Say in certain cases in usability labs and all, right, there are mirrors behind which the participant actually sits, and you actually can observe the participant from behind the mirror. So in that way, the participant is not aware of how many people are looking at the participant, or how many people are how many prying eyes are there upon the participant. Uh, but uh, uh, but having said that, there are certain cases in, say, ethnography interviews in which you do nothing but they just ask questions, interviews, and you capture the whole process say in an audio or visual format. But yeah, having said that, a very important part of it is research ethics, in which you have to inform the user that something of that sort would be happening with them because you would not want a lawsuit from the user later on saying that I did not sign up for this and how did you capture my data. So that is something you would definitely want to get a sign from the user. Yeah.
Okay. So one question is by Neha. She says that what exactly the process is. I'm a UI designer, but my manager wants me to learn UX also. So how should she start learning UX basically?
Okay. So what actually is the ask? So I mean, when someone says learn UX, right? It's a very it's actually a very vague thing. You may as well just go back to your manager and say, what do you mean by learn UX? How do you actually
I think the
learn?
first step to learning UX design basically. Should she learn UX research, UX design? Where should she start from basically?
Okay. So see, if you go by the product cycle, right? First you have got the research, the UX research phase. So you have got the UX research phase, then you have got you research basically, then you give the inputs, then there is a design phase. Ideally, there should be
I think
development iteration. So the whole idea is not having any kind of dev iterations, because in any kind of an organization or a startup, right, development iterations take up a huge amount of their money, a huge amount of funding, and a huge amount of a chunk of the revenue goes into development funding. So that is the whole idea. So if you want, in short, you actually have to start with the UX search phase and then get into the design phase.
okay. Yeah, so I think the question was answered. So yeah, so next question is so how do we kind of decide what number of people should we take for user research?
Talking about the sampling.
Yeah, sampling criteria basically.
Yeah, so as I was talking about it earlier also, right, it totally depends on the importance of your project. If it is strategic project, they can be, say, in certain situations, you can even have up to pan India, you can even have up to 50 participants. But if you're talking about just a feature level usability testing, you can, make do with 5 to 6 participants also.
Okay. Yeah, so one good question that I found is that it is by Sandeep. He says that on what constraints we can define that the research that we have done is coming out to be right for the project, or it is fruitful research basically.
So see, the research, as you're talking about, right? The once you have defined the constraints and once you have defined the context of the research, you will have, say, from a particular research, you would want to get, say, X number of or X percentage or whatever result you want to get, right? That has to be validated in a quantitative form. Only then you can say that, okay, my research has been successful, or this, the intent was this, and this is the kind of say growth I have given because of this research, and hence this is a successful research. So the measure part of which I was talking about earlier, right, is very, very important in that sense, because it is a validation for your qualitative research if you're talking about it.
Okay.
Yes.
So I think was your question answered, Sandeep?
Yeah.
Okay. So next question that we have is that it is difficult to find data for getting started. Can you suggest some sources for genuine data?
Sorry.
So the question is that it is difficult to find data for getting started, like some data of how the user behavior or something like that. So how can they find data if they have to do their own research?
So I'm assuming you're talking about qualitative or quantitative data.
This question is not very clear. This was by Vishal, if he's still on chat. Yeah, Vishal, can you unmute yourself and ask the question again?
Actually, both kind of data, the relevant resources to find the data. Like when you just think of something and you want to get started, and
Yeah.
you have users in mind. So how you get started by that? Like first step.
Okay. So basically, right, there are, if you want to actually get to the level in which say people like Google and Microsoft, they conduct research, right? You have to get to the level in which you actually go through or sift through a lot of research papers, right? If you're talking about say what are the kind of behavior people exhibit at a neurological level, what are the kind of things which goes on inside one's head, or what are the kind of say hormones which are released while a particular application is being used. That is the depth at which they go. What is the dopamine level of people and all of that, right? You will get tons of research papers on that. So that is one aspect of getting into it, and then there are other sources like Google reports, and even for that matter, Google Trends is a very good good resource for judging what people are actually searching for. And again, it totally fits into the definition of what I was saying, is everything is research. There is nothing that, okay, I can only do this, I can only do that. It's getting as much close to the truth as possible by following as many methods as you can do, right? So there are sentiment analysis tools nowadays in which you sniff the sentiment of people and what are the kind of sentiments people are having. So there are a lot of sentiment analysis tools which sniff data from the kind of comments people are making on Play Stores or App Store comments. That will extract the data and give you, saying that, okay, this is the kind of sentiments, etc. So there are multiple such methods, or there are multiple such ways in which you can get that kind of inputs. So research papers are there, reports are there, trend analysis is there, sentiment analysis is there. Then if you're talking about comparative analysis, you can actually go to websites like Owler and sorts, which actually give you what are the kind of investments people have made. In fact, there are certain sources like okay, yeah, Google Trends I've already spoken about. So these are certain sources which you can tap into to get your inputs for the research. But yeah, for research papers, ResearchGate is there. Yeah, ResearchGate is one of the important places where you could you could get tons of research papers on particular topics.
Okay. So another question by Ankita is that what is the range of duration needed for a project and the breakdown per stage? So how much time you can dedicate to one stage of the project, basically?
When you talk of one stage of the project, you're talking about the whole stage, or you're just talking about the research phase? Ankita?
I think
I'm talking about the different stages in the research project. So defining the problem, collecting the data, synthesizing the data.
Okay. So see, most of the companies nowadays, they work in sprints, right? And typically a sprint lasts for a week, right? So you are expected, to complete whatever research work you might have in that particular duration. Say, for example, if you're talking about working days, then 5 working days. Again, obviously depends upon the scale of the project, what scale you're working on. If you're talking about a strategic project, that can that can stretch across months together. But if you're talking about usability, well, yes, you have to wind it up within say within a span of 5 days, for example, say. So and when I'm talking about the 5 days, it's excluding the recruitment part. So from the time you actually start the research work, from the first participant to actually giving the presentation or handing it over to the stakeholders, there should be or there could be a lag of 4 to 5 days.
Okay, great. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
okay. Yeah. So we'll be taking another 3 questions only. So I have 3 questions. So one was from Ankur, that how to document and present research to your stakeholders and business holders, basically. How to document your research.
Okay. Great question, Ankur. So another key feature or another key quality which a researcher should be having is storytelling, right? Because given the nature of insights which you may be getting, right, it is highly possible that it becomes very drab and dry, and hence presenting in a way that is first is comprehensible, and then secondly is digestible, so that it grabs the attention of your stakeholders, is very, very important. And hence storytelling is something which is very, very important for a researcher to have as a quality. And again, for all the folks present here, I would highly recommend that you hone that part of your skill to develop on your storytelling skills.
Okay. That's another question was, should we also pursue a personal project while we are working at a company? Should Vasudha asked that, what do you suggest? Should people be working on their personal research projects while working in the industry also?
Is it necessary, or what could we have it? Sorry, I missed the initial part.
So can people also work on personal projects side by side?
Okay, so see, there is no straight answer to that, because obviously you would have signed a non-disclosure agreement with your company, non-disclosure, non-compete agreement, right? And any kind of work which you may take up separately, if it is for a competitor or in any way it is in violation of the non-compete clause, it might come and bite you back in the ass again. So be very wary of what kind of projects you take once you're in the industry, because no policy should be violated at the end of the day.
Okay. Yeah. So 2 last questions. So one is by Darshan. He says that how helpful is it to apply user research methods to internal users who use the product and getting feedback from them? So I guess he's asking about the people inside the company that he's working at. So how would that work out?
Actually, it does work out really, really great. And a lot of employee experience programs, which a lot of the companies are taking up currently, it is about interviewing their own employees who becomes the user, and trying to figure out what are the kind of pain points or issues or any kind of frustrations they have. But one of the very key factors here is to explicitly tell the employee or the user that this whole session would be anonymous, because there is a high propensity of them hiding any kind of actual frustrations or pain points, because they would be else coming under the scanner, or they might be thinking that they might be coming under the scanner, and hence it is very important to make them believe that this whole session is going to be anonymous, and any kind of your personal data is not going to be captured, and only your, say, demographical data, say for example, what is your age, or what kind of technological capabilities you have, might be captured.
Okay, yeah, I think that is a great answer. And one question from Saloni, last question, is that she has a bachelor's in architecture, but she is good at research. So is it necessary for her to get a master's degree in UX research, basically?
Yeah, if you ask me personally, right, it is not necessary to get a degree for anything unless if you are very good at it. Nowadays there are college dropouts who are working for Netflix and all, right? So the scene is changing. So if you can present yourself, or if you can present your thought process in such a way, that you are in the league of one of the top researchers of the world, then why would you actually need a degree? But if you have that confidence level on yourself, it totally depends upon yourself. But if you definitely think that maybe I'm not equipped enough, or say reading a few books is not enough for me, then I would suggest why not go ahead for a master's degree in UX research. But yeah, but personally, if you ask me, no, a degree is not necessary. It totally depends on the kind of thought process you have.
Okay, so yeah, so last question, the absolute last question, the Pankuri has asked just right now, and how to deal with clients who are not even clear with how, not even clear why they want to hire a UX designer and want to do their project. Basically, if there is not lot of clarity from the client side.
Okay, got it. So see, one of your key responsibilities in that aspect also is making the client realize that कि आपको ये नहीं चाहिए, आपको ये चाहिए, आपको ये क्यों चाहिए, because of these points, or because of these facts rather, which will translate into business and give you revenue in this format, or in X percentage of revenue. This is exactly how you should be tackling such clients who are not ready for understanding the value of UX, or these are exactly the kind of clients जो बोलते हैं कि यार UX designer चाहिए और जिनको कोडिंग आना चाहिए. So exactly ऐसा करके उनको बोलना चाहिए कि यार show them the whole picture and hold the whole picture.
Okay.
So adding to that question,
Yeah, Pankuri.
Yeah, go ahead.
So actually, the problem is that the client I'm working with, they want a UX designer, but they doesn't know like how to they aren't capable of explaining what they want in that project. So usually that's the case with the live projects I'm doing, and they are wanting a UX designer, but they're not clear with their own projects only.
Okay. See, I mean, they are not to blame actually, Pankuri. The whole scenario, the whole situation, India is such as of now, that people have not come to realize the whole potential of what design and research can actually do. And design and research, it comes with an appetite for innovation, and which obviously again has to deal with a lot of risk appetite, right? Because innovation has a component of risk attached with it. When you innovate, you may succeed, you may fail, and being a lot of it in a firefighting mode, people actually avoid research and design, though it it is a must. It is a good to have kind of a thing nowadays, saying यार सबके पास है, हम लोग भी designer hire करेंगे, हम लोग भी researcher hire कर लेंगे, type of a scenario is there. But
yes,
having said that, I think it is definitely the responsibility of a researcher, or for all the designer folks out there, to give clarity to the client that यार आपको ये नहीं चाहिए, आपका actual problem यहाँ पे है, because because of, again, the scientific method, saying that this is the test done, this is the result, and these are the kind of results, and once this has been solved, this will translate into, say, X% growth or X% revenue, or X% reduction in your top line or your bottom line from the PNL, and all of that, right? So
Yeah,
And
yes, sir. Thank you so much, sir.
one more thing that I would like to say is that you can also, you'll have to go the extra mile basically if the people are not able to understand. You'll have to show them actual results before they are able to understand you. So I think if nothing else works, then you should go the extra mile to make a point basically. And yeah, so I think that would be also a great option.
Yeah, definitely. For all the folks who are still there on this presentation, right? See, as a researcher or as a designer, right? It is your duty to, as Karan was saying, to go the extra mile. To show that what impact design can actually have. Because abhi it is not that developed, and hence going that extra mile always helps in people realize the kind of potential design or research actually has.
Yeah, so that was it about the questions, I think. So I think this is a wrap up from both of us.
Yep.
And Anurag, would you like to say anything before going?
Wahi ki, don't ever stop learning. Always keep reading, always keep experiencing. That is the only way you can actually become better as a designer, become better as a researcher, become better as a person for that matter. Because again, design and research, it depends a lot on empathy. And आजकल empathy बस एक word बन के रह गई है. And if you actually want to exercise it, if you actually want to become a good designer or researcher, right, you have to start exercising empathy. And for exercising empathy, you actually have to change the way you think and the way you perceive world and how you treat others. So that would be my only suggestion and thought for food for thought for all the people present here.
Okay, so one question is that where can people reach out to you? Are there any sources? Are there any platforms?
I am there on LinkedIn. You can just drop me a ping on LinkedIn, and
I have already dropped your LinkedIn account here.
Okay. Great. You guys can reach out.
So you can reach out to Anurag and also me on LinkedIn, or you can also reach out to me over email. And thank you for attending, everyone. So I'll inform you about the future sessions shortly. And if you have any suggestions, please feel free to reach out on LinkedIn or over email, and I'll try to conduct one of these sessions around that. So have a good night, everyone, and hope it was informative for you. And see you all next time. Thank you, Anurag, so much for taking the time out today.
No issues. Take care, guys. Take care. Take care of yourself and your family.
Yeah.
Until next time.
Okay. Good night, everyone. Thank you for attending. Thank you so much.
Thank you. Good night. Thank you. Good night.
Bye.